Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells and pretty maids all in a row? Hi guys, how's everybody doing today? I hope you all are doing fantastic. So, Halloween is coming up soon, so I thought today I would read some spooky stories off of the interweb for you guys to fall asleep to. Asleep. And it's raining here today. I don't know if you can hear it, but kind of, if you can, it kind of adds to the aesthetic, I guess. So this is off of the website American Folklore. And this story is called The Haunted Grove. Haunted Grove. So there was a certain man called Angus who lived near the stage road that connected two large villages which were about 14 miles apart. His home was situated nearly midway between them and a mile from a grove of trees that was reputed to be haunted. Angus was an educated man who subscribed to several Montreal newspapers, so he went 2 or 3 times a week to the post office late in the afternoon when the passing stagecoach delivered a big leather mailbag. The post office was in a farmhouse, and to reach it, he walked through the haunted hollow wherein the grove of trees grew. It was just about half an acre of thinly wooded land, the trees being so far apart that you could easily get glimpses and peeps of the country beyond. One autumn afternoon, Angus was making his way home with his newspapers when he heard the sound of someone chopping down a tree in the grove on his right. He stopped, interested at once. The grove belonged to a neighbor and cousin of his own, and it had been for very many years left undisturbed. So he was surprised to hear someone cutting down a tree there. Angus went to the fence to have a look. The chopping continued, though he saw no one, and he moved along the fence, expecting every moment to see a man in axe. Finally, he shouted. To his intense astonishment, there was no reply, although it was incredible that he was unheard by a person in so near vicinity. As the echo of his shout died away, the chopping, which for a moment or two had been suspended, began again. A curious horror crept over the listener. Angus looked no more, but made haste up the hill and turned the corner turning the corner was soon at home. Angus said nothing about the matter on his first occasion, but a few days later was again at the road returning from the same errand, when he heard the same chopping. In his heart, he thought it must be a death omen. He thought sadly of his worldly affairs and wondered if things were in good shape for him to leave the wife and little ones. For from that hour he expected death to come for him before another spring. He stood listening, and when at last he went home, he related the whole circumstance to his wife. Together they recounted it to their friends, who went in parties and singingly to the haunted grove, but they heard nothing. They also thoroughly searched the little wood, arguing that chopping must leave signs behind in the shape of chips and disfigured trunks. But no, there was no marks of any kind in any part of the grove. Angus was earnestly counseled to cancel his newspapers and stay home, but he refused to abandon his one recreational pursuit. So his friends bade him if he heard the warning again, to pursue his way as if he did not hear it, looking neither to the right nor left. This advice he followed. Angus continued to walk to and from the post office twice a week. When alone, he never failed to hear the mysterious axe at work in the woods. He never heard it unless alone, and it was never heard by anyone else. Although the conviction that his death would happen took firm hold of his mind, yet in time he became so accustomed to the sound of an axe wielded by invisible hands that he went about his usual occupations without experiencing any agitation. Weeks sped on and brought winter and an unusual fall of snow. The stage road became blocked and vehicles left the highway to make a new track through the fields. For several months that winter, the real road through the hollow was not used, and the snow, which drifted high in it, covered the dikes on each side. Temporary roads and footpaths were made, winding lines over the white plains on every hand. Angus followed one of these roads, which ran parallel to the real highway, until he reached the grove, when he would walk directly through the trees, aiming for his own house, and thus greatly shortening his walk. The trees protected the place from wind, so there was no drifting, and walking was easy. At home, Angus said with grim humor that the man in the bush seemed pleased that he was walking directly through the grove that winter, for his chopping was louder than ever before. His wife repeated her counsel, earnestly telling Angus to only look straight before him and never stop, nor answer any sound in that unholy place. Angus took the advice to heart, and each time he went to the post office for his newspapers, he strode steadily through the haunted grove, looking straight down at the trail before him. On each journey, the sound of the phantom axe grew louder. One day, the owner of the grove and his sons went over to chop one particular tree that appeared to them to merit destruction. It was late in the afternoon when they began to chop, and one said with a laugh, "Do you think we are taking the tree that poor Angus' ghost had been working on so long?" Perhaps the invisible man in the bush heard them, for the phantom chopping was not heard that evening. Their task was nearly complete when Angus turned into the path through the haunted grove with his newspapers tucked under his arm. Hearing the familiar chopping sounds, Angus kept his gaze fixed on the track, not realizing that the current source of the sound was the owner of the grove and his sons. Above the snowy trail, the tree was swaying and shivering, ready to fall. Angus knew the sound of the final stroke that parted the tree from its stump, but he thought it was another trick of the man in the bush. Suddenly, the chopping sound ceased. Angus's blood froze when he heard his own name shouted in tones of horror. He quickened his path, looking neither right nor left, and his path took him directly underneath the swaying behemoth. Crashing branches and pounding feet mingled with shouts of warnings as the enormous tree toppled to the ground, crushing Angus beneath it. When the heavy tree was removed and Angus's poor body was borne home, the neighbors who remained behind heard inhuman laughter among the trees and knew that the man in the bush had lured poor Angus to his doom. Okay. Well, I guess Angus was right. And that chopping meant that he was going to die. How about we do one more? So this one is Bloody Mary, quite contrary. It's the legend of Mary Tudor, the Queen of England. Mary, Mary, The half-heard whisper woke her in the darkness before dawn. Darkness, how appropriate. These days, it seems as if her whole life was in darkness. It had not always been this way. She was born at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich, England, on February 18, 1516, as the eldest daughter and only surviving child of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Mary was baptized a Catholic shortly after her birth. Mary lived the life of a privileged princess in the English court. Then things began to go wrong. The king wanted a son to rule after him, so Henry changed his religious affiliations from Catholic to Protestant, annulled his marriage to Mary's mother, and married Anne Boleyn in the hopes that his new queen would bear him a son. Mary was embittered by her father's treatment of her mother and angered by his blatant religious heresy. It was not right that the king and his people should abandon the Catholic Church just because the kings wished to annul an unwanted marriage. To Mary's further outrage, Queen Anne, following the birth of her daughter Elizabeth, pressed for an act of Parliament to declare Mary illegitimate. This placed the former princess outside the succession to the throne. To add insult to injury, Mary was forced to serve in the household of her young stepsister as a reminder of her new status as an illegitimate child. The memory made Mary's stomach roll. She rolled over in bed and pulled the pillow over her head. Mary, Mary, white contrary, the dream whisperer came again. Mary clapped her hands over her ears to block it out. The dream voice had plagued her sleep ever since her father's annulment. It was true, she felt contrary most of the time these days, angry with her parents, angry with the country that would change its religion at the whim of their king, angry at everything. As the sky outside the window turned gray with the approaching dawn, Mary continued to brood on the bloody reign of her royal father. In 1536, Henry had Anne Boleyn beheaded and married his third wife, Jane Seymour, who gave birth to Edward, the long-desired male heir. Jane Seymour insisted that the king make amends with his daughter Mary, and so she re-entered the royal court. But Mary was an outsider now. She was a faithful Catholic, and everyone around her was a despised Protestant. "How does your garden grow?" the dream voice murmured soothingly to Mary as the sun rose over the horizon. When her father died, Mary's half-brother took the throne. He was a consumptive young man, and Mary knew his reign could not last. But Edward was a Protestant and did not want his Catholic half-sister to take the throne. At the contrivance, the powerful Duke of Northumberland, Edward had his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, appointed as the heir to the throne. When Edward died, Lady Jane would be the new Queen of England, and the Duke could control her through his son. Edward fell very ill at the age of 15. Mary was on her way to visit her dying half-brother when a breathless spy hailed Mary's entourage and told Mary her brother had died and that the Duke of Northumberland had seized control of the Tower of London and its armory. He had posted a double line of armed guards round Greenwich Palace to prevent news of the king's death from becoming known, and had ordered out a cavalry troop to capture Mary. Mary hid from the Duke's troops at Swanson Hall, the home of her loyal subject, Sir John Huddleston. She had spent a restless night in a four-poster bed in the tapestry room of Swanston Hall, and now lay brooding over the unfairness of fate in the dim light of morning. Quite contrary, the dream voice murmured again. All at once, Mary heard a shout from the roof. She sat up in bed, alarmed by the cry. A moment later, a maid ran into the room to tell her that a band of cavalry were rapidly approaching the house. Mary was disguised as a milkmaid and hustled out of the house and into the courtyard, from which she rode behind one of Sir John's grooms while Sir John himself escorted her. When they looked back from the hilltop, they saw the Duke of Northumberland's men setting fire to the house, angry that Mary had escaped. Mary drew in a proud breath from her perch behind the groom and said to her host and rescuer, "Let it blaze. When I am queen, I will build the Huddlestons a better house." She kept her word. Mary wrote a letter laying claim to the English throne and raise an army against Northumberland. As soon as Northumberland was defeated, Mary ordered Swanston Hall rebuilt. She later honored Sir John with a knighthood and appointed him a privy councillor, vice chamberlain, and captain of Her Majesty's bodyguard. Queen at last, Mary gloated when she finally sat alone in front of her palace mirror before her bed. For a moment, she saw flames flickering around her head and torso, but it was only a sudden blazing of the wood in the fireplace as a pine caught fire. Tomorrow she would begin repealing those shameful religious edicts put in place by her half-brother. She would bring Roman Catholic faith back to England. We need to bring back the old heresy laws. This is what we must do, Mary murmured to herself as she lay down. On the edge of sleep, she thought she heard the dream voice whisper, "How does your garden grow?" Mary's Catholic reforms were not popular among the nobility. This proved to Mary how corrupt her country had become under the Protestant faith. She was determined to secure Catholic succession, knowing that if she remained childless, the throne would pass to her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth. At the age of 37, she had no time to waste. To accomplish her goal, she arranged to marry Philip, King of Spain. Philip was a handsome fellow, 10 years younger than Queen Mary. She was smitten with him as soon as she saw his portrait. Philip was less taken with her, but he conducted himself in an acceptable manner during their wedding and afterward. In September 1554, a court doctor told Mary that she was pregnant. At 38, there was much concern that she would not survive childbirth. The council ruled that should Mary die in childbirth, the British throne would pass to her child and not to her husband. Realizing that the council would never let him rule England, Philip gave up all pretense of regard for his wife or his unborn child. Mary's heart was broken by her husband's withdrawal. As she awaited her confinement, she turned her attention to something she could control: the punishment of heretics. In February 1555, she had 2 Protestant clergy burned at the stake. That night, she dreamed of the fire at Swanston House. In her dream, she saw the faces of the dead Protestants hovering in the flame and heard a voice whispering, "Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow?" Shortly after Easter, Mary went into Hampton Court for her confinement. On April 30th, a rumor spread that she had given birth to a healthy son. But when no official word came from Hampton Court, the public realized the rumor was false. May came and went. Queen Mary was still childless. By June, it was apparent the Queen had a false pregnancy, possibly brought on by her intense desire to have a child. In her anxiety and confusion, Mary blamed the Protestant heretics for bewitching her so that her long-desired child could not be born. In a bitter twist of fate, her husband Philip left England soon after Mary came out of confinement, and he stayed away from her for 2 years while he fought a war against France. This was the final straw for Mary. In her mind, the Protestants had cost her the succession and her husband. She would make the heretics pay dearly for such interference. There were so many Protestants in England that Mary could not order executions fast enough. Every Protestant she burned at the stake was another win for her poor unborn child and for her dead mother whom the king had divorced. People started calling the Queen Bloody Mary, but she didn't care. She had to wipe the Protestant scourge from the face of England. And then her husband Philip returned in 1557. Hope blazed in Mary's heart. She had another chance of redemption. Surely this time she would bear him a son. It was true that he had only returned because he needed England's help in the war with France, and she knew he had brought a mistress with him. But Mary didn't care. Only the conception of a Catholic heir was important now. Mary ignored the mistress and attempted to reconcile with her husband and win his war for him. She failed in both regards. Philip lost his war and left Mary for good this time. Still, Mary fooled herself into thinking she was pregnant again. When 9 months passed and no child came, Mary sank into despair. Late in the fall of 1558, an extremely ill Queen Mary lay brooding on her bed, watching the flames from the fireplace flicker in the mirror. Thoughts whirled through her feverish mind. Her Roman Catholic beliefs had lost her the support of the nobles and most of her countrymen. And her childless state and the edicts of the council had lost Mary her husband. Now some court wag, if she knew who, she would have had him beheaded, had invented a nursery rhyme aimed at her as she gazed unseeing into her mirror. Mary heard the dream voice that had plagued her most of her adult life, chanting the words to the nursery rhyme. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells and pretty maids all in a row. Such an innocent sounding rhyme, but the garden in the rhyme actually referred to the number of Protestants she had sent to the graveyard. The silver bells and cockle shells were torture devices, and the pretty maids in a row were guillotines. How dare the nobles mock her? How dare they? Mary felt death tiptoeing nearer, and there was no child. No one to prevent her Protestant half-sister from taking the throne. Mary felt a tear roll down her cheek and drop to the pillow beneath her aching, heavy head. On the edge of sleep, Mary thought she heard the dream voice crooning, Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? She closed her eyes and felt her soul dropping away from her weary body in death. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, the dream voice spoke sharply. Mary snapped awake, feeling lighter than she had in many years. She frowned, puzzled by what her eyes beheld. She saw a back-to-front picture of her bedchamber, as if she were looking at it through a mirror. Standing in front of the mirror was her half-sister Elizabeth, wearing an elaborate coronation gown. Ladies in waiting fluttered about Elizabeth, making last-minute adjustments to her apparel. Mary was furious. How dare her Protestant half-sister flaunt herself in a coronation gown as if she were the queen? Bloody Mary flung herself forward, wanting to tear the lovely garments from her half-sister's body and wipe the satisfied smile from her face. Mary's body slammed into unbreakable glass. With a scream of rage, Mary pounded her fist against the barrier until blood poured down her arms. Suddenly, Mary felt flames licking the bottom of her skirt. Blistering heat burned her skin and blew her hair up around her face, twisted up with hate and pain. Blood from her hands dripped down the inside of the mirror and pulled around the flames without extinguishing them. Mary screamed, but no sound came out of her parched lips as the dream voice whispered triumphantly, "Bloody Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow?" So those are a couple of the stories on AmericanFolklore.net. There's a lot of stories on there, and if you guys like this, then maybe I'll do another one of these for Halloween. But for now, everybody, have a great night. God bless all of you. Bye.